everybody. Eric Sutphin here, moderating the International Tourism Resource Network's panel regarding how to remote work more efficiently and still maintain a sticky culture. We have some wonderful panelists from across the industry that are going to bring to life this concept for us. While we wait and do a little bit of housekeeping here, I will introduce our panelists and the framework here for us. We have joining us today Jason Persia, Travis King, Tammy Canavan, and Rob O'Keefe to be able to bring a variety of perspectives. This topic is certainly a timely and relevant one as the industry and many industries are having to navigate how we collectively work remotely. Some are returning back to work, some part-time, some full-time, some part-staff. But for the most part, the industry has significantly changed how we are being able to work from home or remotely, and to change the context of how we are communicating and working within our organizations. Some for the better, some for the worse. Today's panel will highlight some best tips and tricks and some great takeaways for you all to understand some great methodology on how to effectively use Zoom or whatever online video conferencing software your organization is using to its highest and best use, and at the same time really continue to create a sticky culture. How do you have the same nuances and community, the culture that you have fostered in the work environment? Without further ado, I will introduce our incredible panelists and give some context about themselves. Joining us from Sprawl Consulting, we have Jason Persia and Travis King. Jason hails from Chicago and has spent most of the last decade living abroad and helping small companies successfully scale their operations. His professional background covers a range of industries, helping from a well-rounded skill set. Most recently, he has worked as the Global Director of Programs for Remote Year. Really great program there. Always on the lookout for new adventures, Jason and his flighted dogs in the Arctic Circle worked on a corn farm in Uruguay and gone rafting in Bosnia countryside. Now he's trying to leverage his 6 years of remote work experience to help companies transition their workforce into the future. Also joining us from Sprawl Consulting, Travis King has a background in youth work, a master's degree in nonprofit management, a Frisbee with him at all times, and a hardcore love of travel. Let's see that Frisbee. Where do you got it with you right now? For the past 4 years leading up to the corona pandemic, Travis was the Director of Community Development for Remote Year, one of the world's largest communities of digital nomads. With Remote Year, Travis led the community of over 2,000 remote workers through the creation of numerous traditions and points of connection, his management of Slack, various in-person and virtual events, and was largely responsible for the supportive, positive, and connected culture for both Remote Year and the community they foster at large. Welcome, and thank you for being able to bring some awesome perspective to this conversation. We're glad to have you. We also have with us Tammy Canavan from Fired Up Culture as the Executive Vice President and Principal of Destination and Travel Practice. With over 30 years of global destination organization leadership, Tammy has a standout career in developing high-performance teams of staff, boards, and community organizations, providing relatable and innovative leadership to bring out the best of organizations and individuals. She's been the past chair of Destinations International and is an award-winning dedicated coach and leader that is highly sought-after speaker at industry conferences around the globe. Tammy, good morning and welcome. Also joining us, Rob O'Keefe, the President and CEO of Monterey Country Conventions and Visitors Bureau. That's always a tongue twister for me. Prior to this role as the CMO of the organization, He has significant experience in developing destination brands, including previously leading the development of the iconic What Happens Here, Stays Here campaign for Las Vegas. Rob has worked with a variety of hospitality brands in his 25-year career and is noted for his innovative style in building relationships and driving results. Good morning, Rob. Real quick before we dive in, we'll do some brief housekeeping here. We want for those of you that are tuning in to be able to leverage the chat feature here as much as possible. This is a way to engage with the panelists here where you can not only pose questions throughout the course of this panel. We will facilitate those, see where there's some common threads where that will further and enhance the conversation. Also feel free to add your name, company, LinkedIn, contact information, and the likes in the chat. Those that are attending this live will be able to receive that so you all can communicate and connect offline. If you want to add in your 2 cents and share a YouTube, a TED Talk, a relevant article that is of value, a book or the like, feel free to share that within the chat feature as that will be distributed to the live attendees that were live here today. Following this, we will send out a post-panel survey, and your feedback is very valuable to the panelists as well as the ITRN network. If you'd like to be connected and enjoy the conversation or perspective that any of these contributors and panelists are bringing to the conversation, happy to facilitate that following this as well. Without further ado, we will dive right into the remote working efficiency and sticky culture panel. We should be able to walk away with some incredible best practices and tips to bring back to your organization, implement this week, and really bring your culture together going forward. So to kick it off, I will bring it back here to a high-level question. In your opinion, and we'll go just around the horn for everyone, give me an idea of how you are seeing the landscape of video conferencing and its impact on organizations, employees, morale, internally and externally. What is your perspective of how that's happened before COVID and now especially accelerated through this pandemic? Tammy, why don't you share your perspective and insights as to how you've seen this dynamic evolve?
You know, it's a love-hate relationship, isn't it, with Zoom and connecting virtually because we need to connect. And yet I hear terms over Zoom burnout, I can't take it anymore. And it's interesting because when we used to go to an office in person, we would see each other and we'd be on all the time. But for some reason, this is causing some fatigue. And I say for some reason, knowing that there are a lot of reasons that we can explain and some things that we can't. So I think it's an incredibly important connector, and the conversation that we have today about using it purposefully and in moderation, just like we take our diet and everything else that is good or bad for us, is a really smart idea. So I'm looking forward to a little bit more of the conversation, but most certainly it's both a critical connection element and a source of frustration for many.
And I didn't get to share this, but Rob and Tammy had once worked together for some time, and Tammy has helped facilitate the culture there at the Convention Bureau. Rob, what's your perspective? How have you seen the landscape change with remote working and the use of video calls and conferences?
Well, it's interesting because we had a distributed workforce to a degree for well before COVID. So people would remote video in from different parts of the country, and they were sort of seen as outliers because they didn't necessarily feel the energy of the room. And then after COVID, and with everybody going to video conferencing, we all have that shared experience now. And it's really sharpened, I think, everybody's sensitivities relative to that connectivity, because there is, initially at least, there's a lack of energy, not in the room. But what we've worked on doing is trying to enhance, create video energy. And there's a variety of techniques we've tried to employ so that everyone's heard the the phrase sucking all the energy out of the room. We've been focused on trying to put energy back into the Zoom and make it feel like we're all in the same place, at least as much as possible. So there's been a significant refinement from what it was before COVID, where just a couple people would video in, to where everybody is. And it's, you know, like anything, video conferencing is both art and science, and it's something that we're still working on. But it's definitely a lot better now. The learning curve, we've moved along pretty quickly, which I'm happy to say.
Love to hear that. I think we have adapted, but of course there's ways to be able to enhance that. Gentlemen from Sprawl, what are your perspectives? Jason and Travis, how have you guys seen this? Because you guys have been doing this for years now. So from your perspective, shed a little light on how you've seen other organizations adopt this, or even the transition for you all through this time.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I've been working remotely and doing video calls with my last company, Remote Year, for the better part of the last decade. And one of the things that we see from all the companies we're talking to is people are still learning how to effectively work on video calls, right? They used to have a very defined role in a company's workflow, and that was for something that connecting with a contractor or somebody overseas, but you're in the office. And I think what we're seeing is the same meeting burnout that people had before. Now they're getting meeting burnout on Zoom. We're replacing all of those meetings in person, and people are still learning how to collaborate effectively, how to start off a meeting, how to take notes, how to share information. And I'm sure we're going to get to some of those best practices in a little bit, but I think really that thing that's stuck out so far, just that learning curve of how to do all of those things that you normally do in a meeting, how to do them the same way or as close as possible over Zoom.
I'll just second what everybody's been saying. I agree entirely with what Tammy and Rob were offering up along with Jason. And yeah, I think like my biggest reflection when you asked that question, Eric, is just the massive gulf still between how certain companies, certain teams take video calls and the culture that they have behind it, and then other companies and other teams. Sometimes you join a video call and 3/4 of the screens are black and you can't even tell if like you're talking to people or like what's really going on. And other times there can be sort of like a fun energy with video call and people like knowing how to be on mute and come off mute and kind of like jumping in and creating sort of like a nice energy like Rob was referring to, where it actually feels kind of like a collaborative, fun environment. You can really feel like that sense of human connection even though you're behind a screen in your pajamas at home or wherever you might be. But yeah, I think there's just still a lot to learn, which kind of, I think, echoes what all three of the other panelists were saying before I jumped in here. But yeah, I think, we're still in that, like, I think Skype came out in the early 2000s, and I remember feeling like that was like some incredible technology, like didn't even know what Estonia was a country back then, but they had created this technology, and now it's like replaced the way we do work almost, fast forwarding 15 years and going through a pandemic and all this. So it is something that I think whether you love it or hate it, that's kind of like, I think, a constant refrain too that Tammy mentioned. Whether you love it or hate it, you kind of just have to get used to it and try to like squeeze the goodness out of it and mitigate any of the bad sides of it that you don't really like. And I think there's definitely tons of ways to do that, which is kind of that best practices conversation we'll get to.
I think all of these have some great depth to it, and certainly could be their own panels. So we'll cover as much as we can get to here today. No doubt, the disruption of not being in the office has created some turmoil. Certainly there's some departments that are able to work fine just at home or without collaboration, but there's certainly some key conversations that really are fostered better in person. And that culture, at first, people were excited, people were working more effectively from home, and everyone was watching it closely, and that dwindled thereafter because they weren't picking up their kids or having office spaces. So keeping that efficiency, keeping that cohesiveness and collaboration at kind of its peak and that culture. Tammy, share with us some of the recommendations, some of the practices you all work through at Fired Up Culture and the organizations you play with to maintain that same zeal that everyone had once they were able to work from home and were just hyper productive in using their time and video conferences effectively that first like 4 to 6 weeks. How do we keep kind of on that high and people energized virtually?
Well, it's And I really think that that Trevor and Travis are going to have Travis and Jason are going to have some really great advice, because that's what they do. At Fired Up Culture, we talk a lot about how do we make sure that we're still engaging our mind and our heart. And I know that sounds a little fuzzy, but it kind of is. And this is really important, is just being really intentional and respectful about the time that we invest in face-to-face communications, whether that's through Zoom or Skype or whatever other software that folks are using. But also being conscientious of when you don't need to do that. And can you go for a walk together on the phone, or can you, have a conversation that way, and still re-engaging, encouraging people to engage in the ways that they used to, but separately, if that makes any sense. Also, just making sure that we're setting aside time for listening to one another. Sometimes when we arrange a conference call, we jump right into business and we forget to have a conversation about the sidebar stuff, or we might be in a little bit of a hurry and forget to ask more questions or be more curious. So always encouraging folks to maintain that relational connection that they have with one another. We talk a lot about how to set each other up for success, and that's really about shared values and about understanding what each other needs. Understanding how some people might really be suffering from some of this isolation, and allowing for some, just giving some allowances and some empathy for that, but also recognizing that some people are really burned out on it. So we talk a lot about encourage conversations between one another on how can people really have a deeper understanding of the needs of their coworkers and their colleagues and their clients, and just be very, very respectful about the time that they're taking, particularly on video. I know that my friends are going to talk about this, but keeping your camera on, shutting off your email when you're on calls, any distractions that you can possibly remove are really important, because it's so much more critical to be present, because people can't always see if you're glancing at your phone while they're talking or other things. So being conscientious about that respectful communication and the time that you're giving people, and being fully present. There's a lot to say, but I know my colleagues have a lot to say too, so I'm going to yield the mic.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just plus one for what Tammy said there. One of the things that we talk to every company about is when you're on video calls, if you don't get to see your colleagues in the office, try your best to see them when you're on a call. So if you can have your video on, it just instantly helps, gives people a chance to read your nonverbal cues, gives people a chance to, gauge how you're receiving the information and things like that. And also starting every call and ending every call with a little bit of conversation in the same way you would in an in-office person. You don't have the water cooler. You don't get to have those little chit-chats, talk about your weekend. And it's really important to encourage the team to bring their whole selves to work, because at the end of the day, it's still essential to try to build a shared team identity, and it's just not the same when you don't have that office to do that. So looking for those little opportunities in Zoom calls really help with that.
Yeah, just to kind of add on to what Jason was saying, I think like a big thing there too that people can try to continue to improve at is inviting, like say at the beginning of the call, you want to have like a little kind of chit-chat, fun catch-up conversation. If you're the manager of that call, you just say like, so what's up, guys? And let people fill the next 5 minutes. It's probably going to be like whoever the most extroverted, mic dominant people are on your team talking most of the time. But if you say like, I want to hear one piece of good news from everybody's weekend, and that's the prompt you set the call up with. You're going to have like all 6 or 8 people on your team share something, even the most shy people, even the newest person on the team, and you're going to get everybody feeling like, all right, I'm part of this call and I'm connected to what's going to happen for the next hour, versus just, what's up? Like, so I think there's ways that you can kind of structure your conversation, structure prompts. One of the biggest things is just a group facilitator. That's part of my background, where I came in with remote year, is that like if you just have the expectation that you put a group of like 50 adults in a room and you're like, they'll get to know each other, like they'll mingle, they'll find connection. That's really optimistic, and it's not really how it goes down. Same thing with the Zoom call. So like if you have a group of people that you just kind of want to have like an organic, nice conversation with, or get people talking, get people connecting, really think of like the best ways to do that. Think of structured prompts. Think of ways to invite every person in the room into the conversation. Like one thing that we're going to do next week for one of our clients, Jason and I, is they have a bunch of new employees since COVID, and they haven't really felt like they've done a good job or had any way to sort of introduce those new employees to the rest of the team. So we're going to run an activity called the hot seat, where each of those 10 new employees will get 90 seconds to get drilled with questions and answer as many questions as they can. And we sort of treat it like a fake competition where we tally how many questions each person answered. This is a really fun way to get to know those 10 new employees at the office versus like a different version of just like, hey, tell us about yourself or something. And then they're just like, this is weird. I don't really know what to say. Like, hi, I'm the new girl or whatever. So thinking of just like, basically not making the assumption that like people will do this naturally and they'll be good at it naturally. You as like the manager or you as like a cultural ambassador for your organization really sort of take the lead and find out what the right questions are, what the right ways to structure an hour-long call are, so that there are designated fun, like times for fun and times for culture and times for bonding, because it's not necessarily just going to happen organically. Sometimes you might have the right people in the room where people are sort of good at it and they can pull each other into fun conversations. But in general, it's not really how it goes down.
There was a lot there, and I love all of that real-world application. Rob, anything to further that in your organization? You guys have been doing this for some time. Is there anything on Zoom calls or how you guys continue to build culture, even while it might be virtually?
Yeah, we, I guess I'm adding on a little bit to what's already been said in terms of being intentional. You really have to think in advance about the dynamic of the workspace, which is essentially your computer screen, and the people that are involved. And engagement is super important. You have to, the person who talks the least, and I think Travis hit upon this, you want to engage that person. You got to be thoughtful about it before you get into the meeting. Put a lot of thought into how do you bring everybody into the conversation in some way, shape, or form, because it's that person or persons who are maybe talking the least may also feel the least engaged. And if they feel the least engaged, you're not getting the best out of them. And everybody on the screen is there for a reason. So you have to prompt them. If they're in a normal meeting, the person is not saying anything. That's difficult, but on a Zoom where they're sitting in a room by themselves, probably like I am right now, like most of us are right now, they feel isolated, and you want to bring them in. You want to bring them in because it adds energy, but also that in a work environment, they work with you or they work for you, and they've got contributions you draw out of them. So I think engagement really is super important. And also, given how long meetings are, know your time limits, know your team's time limit, and take breaks. Give people a chance to stop, to turn their video off and go fill their coffee cup. Be thoughtful about that, because a long meeting in a conference room is an hour and a half, 2 hours. Zoom, it's almost half that time. A long meeting on Zoom be 30 to 45 minutes. And so you got to really sort of inject those breaks, because there's only so long people can take mentally and physically engaging in a computer screen. So it's all about intentionality and really put some thought before you have the meeting, more so than you might have pre-COVID days.
It's funny because we do so much of this in person when we're in our offices, yet translating that virtually online, like you said, unless you're intentional, it's not going to take place. You have to really have a framework. And so with that framework, I'd love to bounce it back to you guys. What are some best practices, tips throughout the Zoom process? And we keep using Zoom, any video conferencing software that your organization uses. What are some great tips and tricks that will enhance how people are able to effectively use it, whether that's in hopping on, in conversing, or in being able to leave the dialogue? Perhaps, I know you guys have really talked about things like muting yourself or being able to get attention and kudos. So I'd love to have you guys share some of those and how the attendees can be able to implement those into their own organizations or adapt to them as they see fit.
Yeah, we definitely have a few of those that we can talk about. This is one of the things that we talk to a lot of clients about, how to effectively run Zoom meetings. We already talked about, making sure your video is on whenever possible. going on mute when you're not talking, just so there's not any background noise or things disrupting. We also always encourage people to turn off any notifications they have on their computer. They can be incredibly distracting, and especially when your video is on, other people can see that you're distracted, and it really hurts, the flow of the call. One tip that we always like to give people, kind of a fun thing, here in Mexico, we use this symbol to say yes, and it's a really fun way to kind of give people, the idea that you're understanding and agreeing with them without having to come off mute and interrupt them or type in the chat box to distract them. A couple other things that I always recommend to people, one of the problems that a lot of remote teams have is they think that it's harder to collaborate in a remote setting than it is in person. So one thing that I always walk people through is, an easy way to collaborate on Zoom is just bring up a Google Word doc, share your screen, share that doc with everybody, and let them type away, let them comment in there, and you can all work together as if that's a whiteboard. And just trying to think if there's anything else, Travis.
I mean, my first thought with this was just to really prioritize getting everybody on the same page in the first place. So if you want to encourage everybody to have their video on, say that at the start of every call. Say, hey guys, welcome to the call. Again, if you can have your video on today, that'd be great. Like obviously maybe somebody got like a bee sting in the cheek and they don't want to like show their video that day. So it doesn't have to be like a hard, fast rule, but just to remind people at the start of the call, like video on would be great today if you guys are able to. And same thing with like how people are dressing, if people are typing in the chat box. Basically just getting everybody on the same page, because you might think it's not a big deal as a manager or somebody in leadership, but there's a very good chance if you have 20 people on a call and somebody's like constantly chatting in the chat box like funny jokes, somebody else might be like, why does Jason think that's appropriate to keep typing in the chat box, where Jason thinks he's helping the call by writing funny little quips into the comment box. So more than like what you think is right now in your mind of like, should people be writing jokes in the comment box or not, the main point is like to get everybody on the same page so that like if it's encouraged, like, hey, you can use the chat box as we go along with this call, which Eric said at the start of our conference today, then at least we all know that, like, if I'm writing in the chat box, I'm trying to just, like, help the energy of the call, keep people engaged in the call, and I'm not trying to distract you from whoever's talking. So really more than anything with, like, what people are wearing, people being on video, people being on mute, people using the chat box, there's just a whole number of things to actually consider in terms of do we all agree on how to approach those different aspects of a video call? Because I think the general thing that people do is, like, make the assumption that, like, it's all fine and it'll all work itself out. But then you have a whole bunch of people on your team like, oh, why has this person always got their video off? I bet they're not even working today. I bet they're home just, like, hanging out and eating breakfast. And then you start to get this, like, doubt and people not being sure about other people at their company and how hard or how much, engagement those people have and how much they care about the mission of the organization and all that type of stuff. So really just getting people on the same page, I'd say, is the top thing to do when it comes to video call culture. And then once people are aligned, like this is how we handle each of these issues, things sort of take care of themselves after that.
What I'm really hearing here is setting expectations, being able, just as we do in person and in our organizations, how do you set virtual expectations of what the group, the audience is expected or even encouraged to do. Part of that and part of these softwares is a lot of other functionalities. We have the ability for Q&A or panels or even breakout sessions where if you've got large groups, you can break into smaller groups. How do you guys encourage or do you have best practices around some of these things like the Google Doc and whiteboarding? Is there sometimes an overuse of these that is unnecessary, or how and where should people use it? Back to the word intentionally. How can people use some of these functionalities intentionally? Rob, have you guys used them in your organization?
We have, and I was just going to say, I think to add a little bit to what Travis had just said, you have to think about the meeting itself. What's the intention of the meeting? And not all meetings are created the same. We do a lot of brainstorming, for example, and in a brainstorming meeting, it's a very different dynamic, even in a Zoom, than it is in than it would be compared to a strategy session or something that's got a little bit more gravitas to it. And I've been known in my organization for having lots of props. So, for example, I yo-yo a lot, and Tammy's going to grin a little bit because she got me some yo-yos once as a birthday present. And in the workspace before COVID, I would walk around the office with my yo-yo, just interacting with people and saying hello or talking about something, or in a brainstorming meeting, where that type of activity is sort of to loosen everybody up. In those types of meetings, you can still do that on Zoom. And one of the things that I encourage is people to get up. Now, that's uncomfortable. If we all stood up right now, where we actually showed what we're fully wearing, would we be, all of us, comfortable doing it? I'm willing to do it, but I don't know if everybody else is. And and the point is, injecting some movement into certain types of meetings because they call for that, and that's, again, another way to enhance the energy. It's okay to do that. And in other meetings, it's really just, you're going through a checklist of something that needs to be done with your team, and it can be a quick 10, 12-minute meeting, and that's okay too. And other meetings that I have meetings many times with elected officials. Let me tell you, those aren't always the most exciting meetings. But I guess my main point is not all meetings are created the same, and you want to tailor your approach to the meeting, going back to being intentional, tailor your approach and find ways to, and going back to energy, inject energy into the conversation to the degree that you can. That's going to make people, at least in my experience, feel closer together, even though we're far apart.
Rob, I love that, Mitt. It almost answers Esteban's question. He types in saying in smaller dialogues where it's one-on-one or small groups, it can be very personal. We can be able to have a little bit more chit-chat and dialogue in a lighthearted manner. However, as the group tends to grow, we lose that. It becomes a little more structured. It's less inactive. How do we maintain that kind of overview and structure while still having that energy? And I think you hit it on the head. It's intentional. It depends on the meeting, the intent, but some planning and preparation and just being cognizant of, okay, how do we ask some of those fun questions that are open-ended at the beginning of the question and do a round robin, or how do we use the conversation where we're talking with people instead of to them, is a great way to keep it lighthearted. Tammy or Jason, do you guys have other thoughts on how, as the size of the Zoom grows, can you maintain some of that energy as well?
I'll go. I would go back to the planning and purposeful intent of your meeting. So being really clear on the purpose and what it is you're looking for folks, and just always remembering that every encounter is a relational one. And the whole point of focusing on strengthening our culture is remembering what we're all here to do together. What is our mission, and how do we support each other in that? And in order for that to be as strong and resilient and build as much capacity and avoid distractions as possible. So building that stronger culture means that we're paying a lot of attention to those relationships. So it is a little harder when you've got a whole bunch of people on the call, and some people still try to hide like they would in the corner of a boardroom, but really being really intentional and giving people safe ways to participate in meetings, because not everybody is going to be as comfortable speaking up or voicing opinions as others. So don't put people in an uncomfortable space, put them in a safe space, but be really intentional in ensuring that everyone that should participate does. Sometimes you're just broadcasting information, and that's okay. But really the point of getting together by video is so that you can see people's reactions to material. So for example, when I'm facilitating some information or a conversation, even if I'm sharing my screen, I've either got the PowerPoint or the whatever I'm presenting on a different screen, or I've got it printed and I'm just looking at the people, so I can see how engaged they really are and be really intentional about pulling out that engagement and that participation.
I think that's a really good point. There's also a couple fun ways. I've been on a call that was prompted, everybody wear your favorite hat to the call. And it's something that's silly, but it starts the call with everybody coming on and laughing and having a time and getting involved on something that might, not be relevant to the call, but it opens it up. And Eric, I think you also touched on something, one of the really cool features of Zoom, if you do have a paid account, is that you can run breakout sessions. So, if you get on a call with 40 people and you're expecting to brainstorm, realistically there's going to be 5 contributors and a lot of listeners. Whereas if you break that up into, 6 different rooms, you get, 5 to 7 people on each call, and then they break out for 15 minutes and come back with notes. That's a great way to get everyone involved and kind of get some more diverse opinions without spending the time to listen
Well, yeah, I was going to add too. I think another thing, kind of to go along with everything that was just said about setting up meetings intentionally and with purpose, like Rob mentioned, like say the purpose of the meeting at the beginning of the meeting, and whoever's leading the meeting, at least maybe you don't need to share this much of the detail, but have like an agenda of like 15 minutes for this, 10 minutes for this, whatever it might be. And also like try to do the like under promise, over deliver side to the rest of the people joining the meeting. So if you think the meeting is going to last 45 minutes, set it for an hour. It's good news for everybody. You're like, hey, here's 15 minutes back to your day. But how often have we all been on video calls where somebody set it for 30 minutes and it's already 10 minutes over and you haven't really even like finished the conversation? You're like, okay, like we'll just figure this out later and bye. Like that's not a great feeling for anybody on the call. So I would say always like set it for longer than you think it's going to last and give people back their time, because that just is good news for everybody on the call. And try to stick to an agenda and have that preset before you even jump into the meeting, like Rob was mentioning a bunch of just like having a real intention behind what you're going to structure the hour to get done. And the last little idea that I was going to bring up that we used to do it remote here, and Jason and I do with some of our clients now, is say you have a pretty big meeting, 30 people, 40 people. The chat box is a really great feature that is getting underutilized today even. So jump in there and write some stuff on the chat box. But one thing we would usually do is say there's a new announcement or something new happened or a new brainstorming idea. We could say like, all right, everybody on the count of three, type in like the first word that comes to mind about this new project we're going to start. And like 3, 2, 1, and then everybody types a word, and whoever's kind of running the meeting can read all those words, and it's just kind of funny. Or on a scale from 0 to 10, how do you feel about this new program that we're about to launch tomorrow? And everybody can write down, what they feel about that. So it's just a way to also get engagement when obviously you can't have 30 people talking at the same time on a Zoom call.
I've seen the chat box and the breakout room be a really great way for longer meetings. When we're talking about Zoomed out or all these webinars or half-day conferences that are going on, if it's longer meetings and people are getting that fatigue, to have those breakout sessions or to take a break itself and then get people back, have a dialogue, to just as we would in person, to be able to break that up. But it does further that, it's more taxing. It's a way different dynamic than in person. So with that, there are some things that it's certainly conducive for. There's other meetings that are way better done in person, but sometimes we don't have that luxury. Rob, how have you seen that loss of ideation or collaboration in the remote workspace transpire and evolve? And perhaps how can those that are listening overcome that? What can they do to be able to reinstill that ideation and collaboration virtually?
So, and I've had a lot of my peers in my industry talk about the benefits of going virtual. Most of it's because of cost savings, and I've had people say, well, even after COVID, we're going to get out of our physical space, and who needs to pay rent, because we can be effective doing it this way. I go against the grain a little bit on that. I think that there is a degradation of ideation. In the best circumstance, you have that opportunity when you're all in the shared space to create and build upon ideas. Going back to my yo-yo example, walking around the office, I could talk to someone about something, we get an idea going and say, hey, let's go grab so-and-so. And the next thing you know, you've got a really great idea built off of 2 or 3 conversations in 30 minutes in the video conference environment. And with the remoteness, where people working in different spaces, a great idea that could be built in 30 minutes after a couple of conversations might take 3 days. So there is a noticeable loss. What I've tried to do, and we tried to do in our organization, is do more teaming where outside the video conference environment or in the video conference with a couple of people to prepare for a bigger meeting, say you two work together to come up with something and then jointly present that at the next team Zoom. So you are effectively, and you would do this in a non-Zoom, non-video conference environment anyway, but again, it goes back to being intentional. You want to give people the opportunity for that ideation, that building. You just have to do it in a different way, and then have them come prepared for the bigger meeting with the bigger group. And that's worked pretty effectively for us. especially when you're putting people who are, serve two different purposes and they don't normally work together. Find ways to bring them together. That's helped sort of overcome that ideation drain that we've had. But it's still a thing to me. It's something that at the end of the day, in my opinion, that you're never going to be or get the best results or results comparable to being in person. So while I think it's important for us to talk to and make this environment that we're working in effective, I look forward to getting back to where we were before. But I think from this experience, utilizing this as a technique, utilizing Zoom, is something that's going to continue. For us in our organization, we're not going to stop doing this, and we're going to take what we've learned from this and make our organization better. At the end of the day, in person will always be our first choice. I don't know if that answers your question completely, Eric. It kind of went around the bend on it a little bit.
No, certainly some great insights and application there. Tammy, do you have other thoughts, things that you guys are doing, implementing?
I do.
Please.
So this environment is great for planners, right? People who like to think things through and think a little bit more. So some of the things that I've seen work in replacing that sort of spontaneous walk down the hall with a yo-yo kind of thing is organizations where you can share calendars and everybody has a certain time period set aside where they're just available. So that could be your potential virtual walking down the hall time, and you still have to plan knowing that, every day from 9 to 10:30, I can call anybody and expect that they're going to be available versus trying to find out if I need to schedule a meeting and other things. So planning timeframes for spontaneous connection can be really helpful. But I can't deny that for my friend Rob, who I have known for a good 8+ years, he's a spontaneous guy. He's not a time planner. When he's going to be inspired, that's not going to be at the time that you expect that's going to come to him. And there's a lot of creative people that are like that, particularly in the marketing field and sort of the folks that get those deep vision inspirations. They bubble up and they come at 2 o'clock in the morning or at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It really doesn't matter. So I think that taking a look at how we can help one another and support that and recognize that somebody like a Rob is not calling in the middle of the day just to disrupt you and annoy you. That's just the way he's wired. And so that goes back again to really understanding our colleagues and what they need in order to bring their best selves, and having a real desire to help each other get there. And that means also communicating your own needs. I'm a planner. So Rob and I are great opposites, and we're a great team, and I've learned to trust his spontaneity, and he's learned to deal with my planning issues. And so you find that. And that really, again, is just going back to investing in those relationships so that you can strike into that culture and you can get the best out of everybody with the circumstances that you want. That said, there is, being in the tourism industry for 30+ years, there is no replacement for what happens when people get together in person. And we shouldn't pretend that there is. And certainly if that was the case, we would not have one of the largest industries on the planet that had been thriving so much before COVID and something that we're so desperate to see come back. So try and create some intentional space for our spontaneous friends so that you can continue to have that ideation and that collaboration. And I think that probably Jason and Travis have some other creative ideas since they've been doing this for such a long time. There are teams like TripAdvisor and others that have been virtual for years and always will be because they're spread out all over the globe and they seem to make it happen. They do ultimately come together a couple of times a year in person, but ultimately they found a way to really make that work and have that creativity flow. But they're also hiring people that are attracted to that kind of environment versus what we're trying to do here is in so many places trying to take people who have been accustomed to an in-person environment and transfer them over to a virtual environment. And that is a harder adjustment for some, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, Tammy. And I think, Travis just mentioned this in the chat, but those in-person events, whether it happens once or twice a year, fully remote teams, can be such valuable times for that ideation and creative side. But one of the things that I've really noticed kind of along those lines is when you're working remotely, and especially with a distributed team, a lot of that work is asynchronous, which means it takes longer for every step of the process. So one of the things that we often encourage clients to do is, make sure that they're empowering their people when they have an idea. Make sure that they have the authority to try to run with that idea and take on some ownership. So they don't have to wait for that, chain of approvals that might take 2 or 3 days before they can even really start on that project.
Yeah, and I'll jump in too. I think we've talked a lot about just video conferencing and Zoom and the power that these platforms give to remote teams. The one tool that I think is almost equally as important or as powerful that we haven't really talked about is Slack or Microsoft Teams. Like Teams to me is just like a slightly worse version of Slack. But if you guys have used either of those, they're sort of like a super fast, fluid communication platform where I can just write Tammy and say, hey, Tammy, you got a second? She'd say, yeah, what's up? I'm online. And then if we start to bounce an idea back and forth in written form, we can say, hey, let's jump on a call. And you can kind of try to speed up those communication loops. I think Rob hit it right on the head what he was saying about like you can stop at somebody's desk and have like something that could take place over 3 days virtually happen in 30 minutes. I think tools like Slack or Zoom can really help you get somewhere closer to how fluid and how fast the comms can be in person. But like in this whole conversation in general, I'd say that back before the pandemic and like the way a lot of industries worked, a lot of work was getting measured by like watching people work. So I think one of the biggest benefits of this like kind of remote revolution and the future of work is that now we have to come up with better systems for accountability for people that we work with, people on our teams, and measure work by like what did you get done, how many projects did you get done, how many like clients did you reply to, or whatever it might be, those metrics that you can set up. And then also, like last night I was working on a project till like 8:30, 9 p.m. at night, where normally in the office setting prior to this time, it's not a time that anybody's normally productive. That's the time when you're watching, whatever might be on TV. So I just really love some of the things that remote work has done for work in general in terms of like you get to choose when you're feeling most inspired and most productive, and you get to like choose how you're going to measure what's getting done in your industry and in your team. And those things are hugely beneficial, I think, to the way all work's going to get done going forward. And it's sort of, again, back to the point I made earlier, it's like taking the good things that come with this remote setup and this remote environment and trying to mitigate any of the bad things. So using those faster communication platforms like Slack and Teams is definitely going to help speed up those comms loops. And just working when you feel inspired and not feeling like you're so stuck to a 9-to-5 schedule. Those are some of the things that I really love about the future of work and some of the things that Jason and I are trying to get our clients to really embrace and really ride the good side of this remote wave.
If I could add something, when we talk about tools to use for better communication, there is this thing that is sort of having a rebirth. It's called the phone. That's always there. And I think we need, and we've done this, to remind ourselves and our teams that sometimes you could just pick up the phone. You don't have to set up a Zoom. You don't have to set up an invite. Like what Tammy had said earlier, if you put on your calendar that you've got open time, you're available, someone can just give you a call, give you a ring. And in some ways, in some conversations, that's almost more personal than a Zoom, because you're in a lot of instances, once you have your phone on speaker, you're talking to somebody. You almost feel a little closer to them. And depending on the type of communication you have, you want that connectivity. And sometimes, oddly enough, even without video, the phone kind of conveys that. So that's a tool that I don't think should be overlooked in creating interconnectivity between teams during this COVID world that we're in.
I'll just add to the phone.
Rob, we have these computers. You want us to go back to our phones?
Yeah. Crazy.
Pagers are next.
The new version of
what you shared about I love what you shared about being intentional with meetings and setting times for either just a block of the ability for people to reach out to you where you don't have dedicated meetings, can answer emails or take calls or whatever. There are also ways I've seen organizations have, creative brainstorming sessions around a topic or an event or something to better the organization, and they dedicate that time, to just have some ideation around that without an expectation of being able to complete completely get there. You guys also have seen, you know, happy hours. There was a lot of people who, at work or even just personally, that were doing wine happy hours through Zoom amongst their friends at the beginning of the pandemic. I have not heard or seen of that now in some months, but there's some creative ways with intention to facilitate and structure remote team happy hours to deepen that culture and connection. But I think it takes that planning, that preparation, that intention. Have you guys facilitated other happy hours or unique ways to build that beyond just, you know, drinking wine together?
Yeah, you know, I think it's really important. We've always joked about everyone's been to a happy hour, and usually it's just a few people talking, and it's a little bit weird. And, you know, my colleague Travis always has this line that structure breeds creativity. So giving people some sort of an outline helps them get creative and think of things to work with. So, for example, one of the workshops that we often lead is a story slam. So we give people a theme ahead of time and say, hey, this week's story slam is going to be about, you know, the scariest moment of my life. And then everyone comes in and they have 5 minutes to talk about whatever that is. You know, you can choose those and you can kind of set the theme for what you want people to talk about. Another one we've done is everybody make a Google slide, which should only take you 10 minutes, put some pictures about yourself, things you're interested in, and then you have 30 seconds to introduce your Google slide, and we go through it in a slideshow. But just making those fun and giving them some intentions instead of just putting people in a room and expecting them to come up with meaningful, interesting conversation. It doesn't work the same way as a Friday happy hour when everyone's at the bar together having a drink. It's just not the same. So trying to think creatively, come up with some prompts to get people talking.
And one of our other big ones that we love to run for people is something we actually started at Remote Year called Silo Breakers. So it's like any distributed team, like we sort of, like Jason and I are both on the programs team, so we would meet with the same 10 people, but we never really had a reason to talk to the people on Remote Year sales team. And we never really had the reason to talk to people in, you know, HR, for example, or our local team in Thailand or whatever it might have been. So we created this call called the Silo Breakers that was really intentional about getting people from different parts of the organization into a small Zoom room where there's about 8 people. And then we had a series of 5 questions they would go through of like, what's something you got done recently at work that you're really proud of? What's something you're working on now that somebody in this room might be able to help with? And then we'd go a little more personal, like, who were you in high school? If you were a kitchen appliance, what kitchen appliance would you be, right? And then like all 8 of those people would go around the room, share their answers to those questions, and whoever was like the call captain would type out like a fun little report on Slack about how their Silo Breaker call went. And that was something that we started maybe 2 years ago, Remote Year, that really just like for the first time we did it, people were like, that was so fun. That was like the best hour of work you could ever have. And I got to know a bunch of my coworkers that I don't really get to see that often a lot better. So that's like a very sort of structured version of a fun happy hour type call. But I think it's worth it, putting in the legwork on something like that to really kind of create like the structure that will breed the creativity out of that conversation. Some of the funniest like things you never would have thought you'd get to know about a coworker came out of those calls. And it really connected the company. So somebody on the sales team could be like, you know, I know Travis actually does know about this. I'm going to reach out to Travis today. When before that call, he would have never thought that like I'm somebody he could just send a Slack message to. So I don't know, those types of things are really I think worth putting in the legwork to set them up and to give that structure to making a happy hour or an hour with your team way more effective and productive.
And for the listeners here that feel they aren't creative, they don't quite know what fun questions exist out there. There are icebreaker books, there's blogs, there's, you know, little things on Amazon and like you can Google, or hey, even better, get together with some of the creative or event people in your organization to brainstorm those. Set up a Zoom, have some fun, and do some pre-planning to make sure that it's effective with the rest of the team. So with the final few minutes that we have left, I'd love to just go around the horn. You know, what do you guys see as the future of remote working? What are, you know, some takeaways or something that we have yet to hit on that our listeners can be able to take back and implement in their organization or at least have top of mind as they're continuing to integrate this into their organization? Why don't we start with Tammy?
Unmute. I think there are a lot of observations. One that I would make is that I think that in the past we worked with a lot of organizations where some team members, and remember I'm immersed in the travel and tourism industry as you all are too, but the that there have been a lot of leaders who have been incredibly reluctant to allow even partial remote work or flex time, that kind of thing, that just very uncomfortable with that concept. We've seen an enormous amount of converts in that, to Rob's point, where some are dissolving their physical office spaces altogether. Some are just using shared workspace so that they can get together, collaborate, and have meetings, but the bulk of their work is being done remotely from wherever people want to work from, whether that's their home or whatever else that might be. And different allowances for the flexibility. Folks are the people that used to be afraid of remote work or allowing that kind of flexibility with their team are suddenly finding that by and large they're getting a whole lot more out of their people than they used to, and the concerns now arise about how do we stay connected. So a different shift in thinking, where that was really easy to do in person, now we have to rethink. So a whole new approach to how do we manage our teams, how do we keep ourselves cohesive and together and all on the same page and connected. There's a lot more allowance for flexibility, which is creating a lot more comfort and satisfaction for actual team members. And that's a recruiting advantage that some will continue to hang on to, and some will go back to their original ways. But I would say that's going to be one enormous shift that we see, is as organizations now sort of shift their thinking in how do I make this continuous and continue to have my team members so incredibly happy and productive as we go forward, but still hang on to that connection.
Yeah, and I can jump in right there. I was going to say something similar to Tammy. I think the point, we moved to this remote work because of a pandemic, but remote work was already on the way, and there were reasons for that, and that is because it saves money, it improves the quality of life of employees. Statistics show that employees work more hours when they're working remotely, they're happier when they're working remotely, and there's a lot of other things there. So I think my final takeaway would just be, in this time, we have to remember that remote work is new for a lot of people. And even though we've been doing it for 6 months, a lot of companies have been thinking about it as a stopgap. And so they haven't invested in the training and, being thoughtful and intentional about how this is going to look in the future. So, lead forward with empathy and, try to work with people to help them learn the things they need to learn and be in a position to work effectively in the future.
Awesome.
I would add,
thank you. Rob?
Just a little bit more on this, sort of in the same vein. Any organization that tries to snap back at when we can start working in person, and I'm the one who prefers working in person as a general rule of thumb. But any organization that would snap back and immediately go back to requiring in person and sort of shunning this new workplace environment is going to, I think, suffer for it, because it's so ingrained in us now. This isn't something that's taken place for a few weeks. This has been months, and it will continue to be months. And there are a lot of benefits from it. I think the hybrid workplace is the workplace of the future. And I think organizations really need to think about that, the person, the employee's connectivity to their home space and their family. And it's not a perk to let somebody work from remotely, as it may have been in the past with some organizations. It's a necessity. And I think there's got to be a lot of thought given to the conversion back into a different, or back to the in-person or the in-office. It's a process that's going to take, and each organization is different, each team dynamic is different, but that's really something that needs to be given a lot of thought, that transition. And I know that's what Travis and Jason specialize in, so we'll plug there. But my advice would be, if this is something that's going to take a lot of time, we're in an entirely new dynamic, and we're not going back to the way it was before. And that's something that we have to be mindful about, and again, intentional.
Thank you. Travis, final thoughts and words.
Yeah, I'll just add this part. I think it is the future, like Rob was just saying. We're not really going to be able to go back to what it was. And acting like it's not a challenge is also not helpful. So like there are challenges that come with this. And, you know, to the point of this conversation, the culture side is harder to get right in a remote environment. And one little just last kind of thought about that is, I think previous to COVID, we used to think of culture as like somebody's job, like somebody in HR, it was like their job to make sure the culture was good here. And that really can't be effective anymore. I think you need to try to encourage everybody on your team and everybody in your organization to take the culture on themselves, to be a cultural ambassador for the organization, to show up as a three-dimensional person as best they can in this virtual world and do fun things. You know, like post a picture of themselves in high school and say, all right, now it's Tammy's turn to post the high school photo, and like whatever it might be, fun little things like that, and encouraging everybody at the organization to take on the challenge of making the culture right, even though we're going to have to be remote, you know, for the foreseeable future.
Well, I am fired up. I know Tammy is as well. You guys have been incredible in sharing some awesome insights here into how to more efficiently and effectively work, some great tips that everyone can bring back to their organization and be able to increase the culture, the stickiness, the effectiveness of their conversations. So thank you all for your contribution, your impact on the industry. For the attendees here that would like to engage with our panelists, here is their information. You can be able to connect with them, find them on LinkedIn, go to their respective websites, and I know that they would be thrilled to be able to connect with you guys and continue the dialogue and see how to assist you and your organizations. For more resources and effective ways to be able to transition through the pandemic, create more stability in your organizations, feel free to visit ITRN.global. We've got a variety of topics and resources for you with other panels around hospitality and the new conditions and circumstances we are in and how to navigate those. So encourage you to visit that or our YouTube channel. And stay tuned for upcoming future panels and events that we will be facilitating. Thank you all again for joining Rob O'Keefe, Travis Kine, Jason Persia, and Tammy Canavan. Thank you all again, and enjoy the rest of your week.
You can be able to subscribe to the YouTube channel for more information and get involved in the community and share your own voice and perspective.